On today's episode of Locked On Mariners, it's a trade-a-day blowout. We're going to look at 5 of some of the most requested bats in our comment section coming up. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Friday, June 16th, 2023. This is Trident Gonzalez and Colby Patnett for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB and they'll throw in a free custom birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. As I mentioned at the top of the show, this is a trade-a-day blowout. We've talked a lot about pitchers lately, but now we're going to switch things up and look at 5 bats that have been popular in the comments section the last couple weeks. And we're going to start with a couple guys in San Francisco. That's Jock Peterson and Michael Conforto. Hezekiah asked for us to talk about Conforto. Colin asked for us to talk about Peterson. So we're going to do that. We're going to start with Conforto here because he's the only guy we're going to talk about on today's show who actually might factor into the Mariners 2024 plans, at least on the current contract he has. He, of course, has that $18 million player option this offseason. That will factor a little bit into the conversation, but what's really important here is what does Conforto bring to the table in 2023? How does he help you the rest of the way? Conforto this year, first year back from injury, obviously missed all of 2022. It's been a weird year for him in his first year with the Giants. He's been really bad at, what is it called now? It's not AT&T Park. It's Oracle Park. Yeah. It's been terrible there. 62 WRC plus at home this year. Meanwhile, on the road, he's slashing 303, 398, 587, the 165 WRC plus. Striking out a lot on the road, but also walking a good amount. So strikeouts don't really matter to me when I look at these numbers overall. So again, this is a little complicated, more complicated, not as straightforward than some of the other guys we're going to talk about on the show because of that player option. But what do you think overall about Conforto, Colby?
Yeah, Michael Conforto is a guy that we've talked about each of the last 2 off seasons as kind of like the ideal fit for the Mariners. And it's based on his ability to draw walks. The strikeouts aren't ridiculous. The lefty pull power is legitimate. Doubles, he's just a really good fit for the ballpark. And obviously he's a Pacific Northwest guy. I believe he went to high school in Redmond, went to college at Oregon State. He's just such a natural fit here. And yet the Mariners have now had 2 off seasons where they've had the opportunity to go out and try and get this guy. And they've shown no interest whatsoever in doing so, at least no reported interest. So it's a little bit weird that maybe they just don't like Michael Conforto. Maybe there's a clubhouse issue. Maybe there's just, their scouts don't like him, or their analytics guys don't like. I don't know what it is, but it is a little weird to me that the Mariners have never seriously, at least to our knowledge, pursued Michael Conforto because he is a good fit, just from profile standpoint. So I like the idea, and, just because we're going to talk about lots of guys today, let's assume that the teams that the Mariners are buying, that the teams that they are trading with are selling or open to selling. So let's not have to run that caveat through, because maybe San Francisco is good in a month, who knows, but I think just from in a vacuum, Conforto makes a lot of sense. I think he'd be a good fit. I think he'd probably slide somewhere 2 through 5 in this lineup, and you could really put him anywhere. In that sense, not a good defensive outfielder. We know this about him. You want him to be your DH, but he can play left or right. Not well, but he can stand out there. And it's not going to absolutely kill you.
He can play it better than the next guy we're talking about. We'll
which
say that.
isn't saying
That's not saying
which
much.
is not saying much.
The lowest of low bars to clear on that front.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's also not awful against lefties, so you don't have to platoon him. You can use
Yeah.
him. He's just an everyday player.
He's been about a league average bat against lefties this year. Yeah.
So I think Conforto is a very good fit. I think though you have to consider him a rental because in a market that is going to be thin on bats this winter, if Conforto's numbers look like this, if his ratios look like this at the end of the year, he's going to get more than $18 million.
Yeah.
So I think you have to consider him a rental when you're discussing it. Will San Francisco agree? I don't know, and that's what makes him a little bit complicated.
So the next guy on the list, Jock Peterson, he is, as we just alluded to, he's a DH. That's all he is. Don't let him anywhere near your outfield. Also, he's a platoon bat in the truest sense of the term. He's only had 9 or 10 plate appearances against lefties all year long. He shouldn't hit against lefties. He's terrible against lefties. However, against righties, I mean, just listen to the overall numbers. Yeah, listen to the overall numbers here for Peterson this year. 280, 391, 533. That's a 151 WRC plus and 128 plate appearances. Just 7 home runs. He's usually anywhere from 25 to 30. He's had a 30 plus home run season 1 year, but
sure, he's on that pace.
Yeah,
just 600 plate appearances. He's on a 35 home run pace for 600 plate appearances. So yeah, the power's still there, but yeah, he's a strict platoon. You do not want him facing lefties ever, and he is a pure DH. He's also a pretty expensive rental. He was qualified offered, I believe. So he's making about $20 million this year. If you trade for him in July, you're still going to owe him $8 million bucks roughly, which makes his trade market smaller than somebody like Conforto, just because there's no defensive versatility and he is a strict platoon bat. But he's so good against righties that they're not going to be giving him away. So he is also kind of a unique figure because, how much is an elite left-handed bat who you can only use 65% of the time and only at DH? How much is that worth, both in prospects and money? Because there are a lot of teams who will not add $8 million to their payroll in the middle of the year.
Sure.
Maybe that team's the Mariners. We don't know. Sure. But yeah, that's certainly an interesting fit. He's obviously a very good bat for what you specifically need him to be. But I don't know if he fits Seattle. And that's kind of part of the problem because Seattle wants versatility. They want to recycle guys through the DH. They, want athletes. There's a lot of things that they want that Peterson just doesn't check that box. On the other hand, it's only half a year or 2 months of Peterson. You can live with a full-time DH for 2 months. They basically did last year with Carlos Santana, and Peterson is a significantly better bat than Santana was, but he's also probably going to cost a little more. Peterson's really interesting. But I don't know if this is the guy that Jerry and Justin are going to go out and get. Also, not for nothing, the Mariners do play in the American League West. Now, granted, they play a lot less games than they did in the past, but there's a lot of lefties in this division. So how many games are you going to get from Jock Peterson where you're just not going to even start him? That's going to factor into your decision on whether or not to go get him.
Right. So if you say face the Astros again in the postseason, you're going to see Framber Valdez. Jock Peterson's probably not playing in that game. He's at least not starting that game. So
right. And I mean the Angels have 4 lefties or 3 lefties in their rotation. The A's, you're not really worried about that, but they have a couple lefties. Texas has a couple lefties. So you're just kind of sitting here. You're interested, certainly. Beggars can't be choosers, but I think that I don't know what Peterson's market's going to look like because I think every team will consider him just a DH. And
Agreed.
So you might be able to get him for less than you think, but it might be such a thin market that you're paying, a premium for a DH only. So it's a tough fit.
But how many teams are actually going to be in on that, considering how limited of a fit it is? Now, you can ask that same question with the Mariners as well, because like you said, it's almost the antithesis of what they look for in a player, right? Just from a versatility or lack thereof standpoint. But the upside against righties, which the Mariners really need right now, is so huge. It just, again, you're not going to be able to use him against the Framber Valdez's of the world in the postseason when it really matters. And look, if you're acquiring Jock Peterson, you're thinking I'm going to the postseason. So, that's really what's most important here to me. So that's why I like Conforto more than Peterson. Just comparing these two guys, who would I rather want from San Francisco? I want Conforto because he's not going to kill me against lefties. He can at least fake it out in a corner on occasion if I need to, give one of my guys a blow for a night. And there's the non-zero chance that he stays in Seattle for 2024 as well. It's a very, very small percentage of a chance, but still there's, at the very least, you get him in and maybe you're able to hammer out a different deal after he declines his player option.
Sure. Yeah. And if you're wondering, well, how bad can Jock Peterson really be in the outfield? He hasn't played in the outfield this year. So that's what San Francisco thinks of him. But last year, he was -11 outs above average.
That's bad. That's bad. For those that don't know, that's really bad.
On only 175 attempts.
Oh, that's really bad.
He's a DH only. So, yeah, I would pay the little bit extra to get Conforto.
Agreed. Though, if they did acquire Jock Peterson, I don't hate it.
No,
I really don't.
Depends on the price, but yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to shift gears and look at another National League West team in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Now, I hate shopping for summer clothes. I just want to be comfortable no matter if I'm at the ballpark or back at home recording an episode of Locked On M's. Oftentimes, though, I find myself settling for clothes that feel cheap, tight, and restricting and make me sweat in all the wrong places. Gross, I know. Thankfully, Bird Dogs has me and therefore you covered. Their wide selection of insanely comfortable shorts, joggers, sweatpants, polos, and more have me ready for any occasion this summer throws my way. I mean, who doesn't love stretchy fabric and built-in underwear? It's time to look good, feel good, and play good this summer. Go to birddogs.com/lockedonmlb for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonmlb for a free Yeti-style tumbler. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Before we switch gears and talk about a couple of Rockies hitters, do us a couple of favors here, folks. First, vote JP Crawford into the All-Star game. If you do it and send us your ballot at Locked On Mariners on Twitter, at LO_Mariners on Twitter, or at lockedonmariners@gmail.com, you're automatically entered into our current giveaway. Colby's giving away a signed Luis Castillo card. You definitely want that card. And also, you're doing it for a good cause, which is getting JP Crawford into the All-Star game, as I think he deserves to at least get some recognition on that front. Secondly, go check in with our friend Jason Burke over at Locked On A's. Go show him some love. The A's and obviously the Oakland fan base going through a lot right now. And Rob Manfred in Major League Baseball not doing them any favors right now. So go show Jason some love. Let him know that we're thinking of him and thinking of the fans down there in Oakland, because that's a really awful situation. All right, so let's talk about the Rockies. Let's talk about Charlie Blackmon, and let's talk about Randall Grichuk. Griffin wanted us to talk about Blackmon, and Mojo Soto 87 wanted us to talk about Grichuk. So we're going to do that. So Blackmon, we'll start with him. Rental, of course, but he's making a good chunk of money. I think it's going to be around $7-8 million. If you acquired him pretty much right at the deadline. He's hurt right now, though. He has a fractured right hand, so I don't even know if he's going to be available to play even shortly thereafter the deadline, because this is recent. I think this only happened a few days ago. So If he is healthy, though, and that again, that's a fairly big if. He's 36 years old, slashing 265, 347, 422. That's a 96 WRC plus this year. Not a good defender. Decent hit tool, doesn't strike out. Walks a fair amount. The thing though, you always, whenever it comes to these Rockies hitters, you always have to look at the home away splits. And the home away splits this year, about the same in terms of WRC plus, but he loses about 40 points in batting average, about 25 points in on base percentage. He's been worse away from Coors Field, certainly. What do you think about Blackmon, Colby?
Not to be a choosing beggar here, but I think you can do better.
Sure. I do too.
Blackmon, if he was a little bit better defensively, maybe that might make more sense, but he's not. He'd be your worst defensive outfielder. He's an older player. He's kind of left-handed type rants. There's not a lot of power there to speak of. He doesn't hit the ball particularly hard, but he does get on base. He does get hits. So it's not the worst idea in the world. And obviously, again, depending on cost, it could make sense. And again, beggars can't be choosers, but I have a hard time imagining a scenario where Blackmon is like the best bat the Mariners can get. So I'd say pass. Now, if he's like the second bat, if he's a part-time bat
sure,
that you're bringing in and you go out and you acquire Jorge Soler or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And then you also bring in Blackmon, then fine. I think that could work. But if like this is your big trade deadline acquisition, I'd be pretty disappointed. He's also got pretty severe splits this year, lefty versus righty, which again, not a huge problem because you do need help against right-handed pitching, but you kind of want an everyday bat, not a platoon bat, or at least that's what you want to prioritize. So could Blackmon eventually make sense? Sure. Yeah. I think Seattle should, and I think Seattle can and should aim a lot higher than Blackmon. Especially for the money that you're going to have to put out.
Yeah.
I
don't see a lot of upside here. I see, floor, which I mean, the Mariners could also use some floor as well. But if I'm trying to acquire a lefty bat, I think that they need to aim higher than someone like Blackmon, who's just going to slap the ball around a little bit and maybe run into the occasional home run, can't play any defense. Again, sure. if I'm getting a corner outfield type who is probably, only going to play out there once or twice a week and then DH the rest of the time, I want someone that can hit for home runs, which is Michael Conforto. That's Jock Peterson. I'm thinking those kinds of hitters. I'm not thinking Charlie Blackmon.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you can get him for Devin Sweet, fine. But
sure,
when you start talking about like, hey, you want to give us Taylor Dollard, and I'm not even a Taylor Dollard guy, like, no, pass.
Yeah.
So,
and from a monetary standpoint, I just don't know if the Mariners are gonna sign off on that for a guy that has the profile that Blackmon has.
Yeah. Plus, not for nothing, I know we're going to continue talking about the Colorado Rockies here. The Rockies are insane. We have no idea what they're doing ever because they're not smart.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the Rockies are a dumpster fire of a baseball ops franchise. Let's just call it what it is.
So Randall Grichuk, on the other hand, he left Toronto. He's been bad, but this year it's a small sample size, just 153 plate appearances, but 307, 373, 438. That's the slash line this year. 106 WRC plus. He's the only righty bat that we're talking about on today's show. He'd be like $4 or $5 million left on his deal by the time that you acquired him. Mm-hmm. Once again, some noticeable home away splits here. 120 WRC plus at Coors, 89 WRC plus on the road. Isolated power, 167 at home to a 092 on the road. He does have 15 extra base hits, but again, you look at the isolated power differences there between home and away, and it just seems like another player that is benefiting from hitting at Coors. And also he's a righty, which isn't necessarily what Colby and I want the Mariners to target. I mean, get good hitters, right? And Grichuk has been fine against righties and lefties this year. There isn't really a severe split disparity there against righties or lefties, but I don't know if I'm really excited about Grichuk. I don't know if I'm like, I got to get Randall Grichuk this deadline,
Yeah. All of his powers to the pull side, which doesn't play that well at T-Mobile. Defensively, he used to be great, but ever since getting to Colorado, he's been below average. He's mediocre at best out there. Maybe that's because, of the huge outfield in Colorado, but he's certainly lost a step over the last few years because he was a legitimate center fielder when he played for St. Louis. And now no, he's not. He's fringe. He's probably 40 grade center fielder, 45 defender. The one thing that's a little concerning about his profile, aside from the dead pull hitter stuff, is that he's running a 7.8% walk rate this year, which is okay. It's below league average, but it's fine. But when you look at his career numbers, he's usually right around 5.5%.
Yeah.
And his chase rate's up right now. His whiff rate is not great. So I do wonder if there's some regression coming. So Grichuk to me, again, if he's your second guy that you're bringing in, if he's coming off the bench, if you're just hoping that he's a little bit better than AJ Pollock, then fine. But the Mariners need an everyday bat, or they need to create an everyday situation by a couple guys they bring in. So if he is the left side of the platoon now, he's pretty good against righties, or at least this year he was, like you said. But in the past, he's been significantly better against lefties. So can he be the weak side of a platoon? Can you bring in Jock Peterson and Randall Grichuk? Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Then I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's your full-time DH right there. But just Grichuk by himself, I'd aim higher.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that the only way that I'm getting fairly excited about Grichuk is if he's accompanied by a platoon partner. Yeah. I just feel like Grichuk is someone that is going to struggle at T-Mobile Park, or has a high likelihood of struggling and regressing hard at T-Mobile Park, because again, this year has kind of come out of nowhere for him. And there's quite a few numbers, as Colby laid out there, that suggests that it might be fake. And especially when you pair that with the Coors road splits, that really leads me to the conclusion that Grichuk is due for some serious regression, that he's not a 100 plus WRC plus guy, that he's not going to be that if you put him in a situation like T-Mobile Park.
Yep.
So we'll see, though. Again, if you pair him with someone like Jock Peterson, maybe that works out quite well for you. I just, on his own, though, in a vacuum, not a huge fan of Grichuk personally.
Yeah. And if you look at his career at Coors Field, it's a pretty substantial home away split.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just, the Coors Field effect is a little bit overrated.
Sure.
In today's age.
Totally agree.
It's not what it used to be, but it's still there to an extent. And when the splits are as significant as Grichuk's is, it just, like I said, if he's part of the platoon that you're bringing in to fix the DH spot, fine. But if he's by himself, I honestly think you're better off just waiting and hoping AJ Pollock figures something out, because at least Pollock gives base running and defense for you.
Right. Hey, the Mariners play a baseball game tonight. I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but Mariners White Sox tonight, City Connect night at T-Mobile Park. You can catch all the action on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. So we're going to wrap things up with one final potential trade target. It's Jeimer Candelario of the Washington Nationals. We'll be talking about him in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make your way to FanDuel, because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. With great promotions every day and instant payouts, FanDuel is where you want to be this summer. Plus, it's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $2,500 when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Again, Mariners, White Sox. You can catch all the action tonight on the Mariners Hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. So one final trade candidate here, Colby, and that's a man that you wanted the Mariners to look at as a potential minor league signing this offseason. Timer Candelario, a corner infielder for the Washington Nationals, who's having himself a pretty good year, has got off to a really nice start, but has kind of teetered off a little bit here as of late. Extinguisher 10 wanted us to talk about him a couple days ago. Candelario right now, heading into today, slashing 245, 328, 432 with a 105 WRC plus. He's worth 1.8 F4, which last time I checked, I think that would lead all Mariners position players, or might tie Julio and Jared. I'll verify that in a second. But Colby, what do you think about Candelario?
Yeah, I still like him. As somebody who liked him last winter and thought he made a lot of sense as a first base / third base, kind of corner infield bat who could DH a little bit. I'd first like to start off by saying, I told you so.
Of course you would.
Yeah, duh. I mean, June's, but look at when you look at Candelario, June's been tough. He's been really bad in June. He was great in May. But when you look at his just overall slash line, but real fast, Candelario switch hitter, which nice little bonus there. Also a very good third baseman. Now this year he's been better than he's ever been, which is a little bit concerning. And last year he wasn't very good at third base. But when you look at the totality of his career, he is a solidly above average third baseman. So if you're looking for what's the difference here between him and Gino defensively, Candelario is probably a little better, but just a little. Gino's pretty good. Gino's pretty good himself. But for me, Candelario is a guy who I'm acquiring to play third base. I'm acquiring him to play first base. I'm going to DH him sometimes. I'm going to play matchup here. If Gino has a particular matchup I don't want Gino to have, I'm going to go to Candelario. If I want Candelario and Gino in the lineup, then one of them is my DH. Maybe I don't want Ty France in the lineup. Okay, well then Gino or Candelario is playing first. So there are plenty of ways to get all three guys at bats. The thing I like about Candelario is that he is a doubles hitter. In 2021, he led Major League Baseball or the American League with 42 doubles. This year, he's already got 17. It's not that he doesn't have any over the fence power, but he's typically going to be around the 15 home run mark, and he's going to hit a ton of doubles. He's going to walk. I would say I feel comfortable calling him at least at a league average rate. 2022, he was pretty below average. He was at 6%. But I think it's safe to say when you look at Candelario's career and you look at what he's doing this year, 2022 is probably the outlier in a lot of ways. He doesn't strike out. He's below league average in strikeouts. At least he is this year, and he was the year before. And that's a part of his game that he's really worked on to be more consistent in putting the ball in play, and it shows in the breakdown of the numbers. He does have pull side power on the left side, home run power legitimately, but it's a lot of doubles, which I think is something Candelario or something I think the Mariners need. Would I like a guy? Would I like a guy who hits more home runs? Sure, but I need pop. I need extra base hits regardless of where they come. And Candelario is a rental. He's on the Nationals, who are already sellers. Like, we don't have to have that discussion. I think there's a fit here. He's not exciting. He's not like the ideal bat. But again, if you're looking for just a good fit for the ballpark at a reasonable price who can fill multiple roles, Jeimer Candelario is probably a guy they should look at. And honestly, they should look at him this winter as well.
You mentioned that he's a switch hitter, but if you're the Mariners, you're probably just buying in on the right-handed version of Candelario because he's been bad from the left side of the plate this year. 67 WRC plus from the left side, but on the right side, 122 WRC plus for Candelario. I like the idea. It all comes down to cost. He's arguably the most valuable piece the Nationals are going to have to offer this deadline. So what are they going to look for? Really, that's what matters to me at the end. But Yeah, I like the idea. Like again, I verified this, by the way. He would be the leader amongst all Mariners position players in F4 right now at 1.8. Julio comes in at second at 1.7. It's certainly like you're upgrading your lineup with Candelario, but again, if the Nationals want like Brian Wu for 2 months of Jeimer Candelario, I'm out. Like, I'm super out.
So is everybody in baseball.
Yeah.
Might cost you Michael Morales. Like if you're
Sure.
looking for, and Morales is having a pretty good year and he's an interesting prospect, but
Right.
he's a fringe top 20 guy. And just for clarity's sake, because we're kind of counting 2022 as an outlier for Candelario, you look back at his 2021 splits, he was actually better against righties. So
yeah.
Yeah. So I like the fit. I think he's probably, in terms of fit, both, roster wise and profile wise and cost, I think Candelario is probably my favorite guy that we talked about today, but I think Conforto and Peterson makes sense too. I'd probably say Candelario, Conforto, Peterson, and I'd be pretty, back and forth on the Candelario Conforto bit. But I think those three make a lot of sense. I'm kind of out on Blackman and Grichuk.
Yeah, I would pretty much say the same thing in terms of my rankings as well. Again, the Candelario is probably my preferred option here because he addresses the infield, whereas Peterson and Conforto, of course, address the outfield, which, look, you obviously have the DH spot that you can rotate guys through. That doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but Candelario can actually give me value in the field, whereas Conforto, not really, and Peterson obviously not, like we've talked about. So the only thing that I get hung up on again is, like, I've just seen too many times bad teams put way too high of prices on their few valuable pieces that they have, and so if they're going to ask for some ridiculous return on Candelario, I'm out. I'm piecing out. I'm looking elsewhere.
Same could be said about the Giants.
That's true as well. And also the Giants on the flip side of things here, they're actually winning right now.
Yeah.
Obviously they've suffered some pretty major injuries with JD Davis and Mitch Haniger the last few days, but there's no guarantee whatsoever that they're selling Peterson or Conforto, especially Conforto, because there is obviously that possibility, small possibility, that he does return in 2024. So we'll see. All right. Well, hope you guys enjoyed the discussion here about some of these bats. I know quite a few of you guys wanted us to talk about these guys, so we did it. We'll talk about the Jorge Solares of the world and the Tim Andersons of the world. I know some of you guys asked for those guys as well. Soler specifically, just to address that real quick. I mean, the Marlins are right now, they're in second. They've been winning a lot of games. I don't know why they would trade Jorge Soler at this point, but we'll talk about him because you guys want us to talk about him, so we'll talk about him at some point. But that's probably what the conversation is going to boil down to, just to let you guys know ahead of time. All right. Again, Mariners, White Sox. You can catch all the action on the Mariners hometown broadcast tonight with SiriusXM via the SXM app. That's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Trident Gonzalez. By the way, sorry if there was any lag on today's show. Internet's been wild here. Colby, did you experience any lag on my side? All right, so we're good, I guess. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez. It's DANEGNZLZ. And Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok as well over at Locked On Mariners. That's one word, Locked On Mariners. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball weekend, and we'll see you next week. Peace.